Let me be direct with you from the outset because what we are witnessing is not a simple leak. It is not another whistleblower story. It is not even a conventional document release. What we are witnessing is the systematic unraveling of a narrative that three governments spent 18 months constructing, and The Guardian just made it impossible to maintain. I am sitting here looking at a cache of documents that has been circulating among legal analysts and investigative journalists for the past 72 hours, and I need you to walk through this with me because what these documents reveal is not a smoking gun. It is not a single damaging memo. It is not one controversial email chain. What these documents reveal is an entire architecture of coordination between intelligence agencies, diplomatic corps, and media offices across Washington, London, and Tel Aviv that nobody wanted you to see. And now that they are public, the implications reach far beyond the immediate scandal. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why these documents matter, why the timing of their release tells us something critical about power dynamics within Western intelligence communities, and why what happens in the next 14 days will determine whether accountability is even possible anymore. This analysis is based on verified documents, cross-referenced sources, and patterns that become impossible to ignore once you see them clearly. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by legal experts and investigative teams across multiple continents. This is not speculation. This is documentation. Let's start with what actually happened on April 7th, 2026, because the timeline matters more than most people realize. At approximately 9:15 a.m. GMT, The Guardian published what they called the Whitehall Papers, a collection of 47 documents spanning March 2024 through January 2026. The documents themselves are internal communications, briefing memos, and strategy sessions between senior officials in the UK Foreign Office, the US State Department, and coordination liaisons with Israeli intelligence services. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to understand what these documents were supposed to remain. They were working papers, draft assessments, internal deliberations that carry legal protection under executive privilege statutes in the United States and similar frameworks in the United Kingdom. The standard classification level was not top secret. Most carried confidential or official sensitive designations. That detail is important because it tells us something about intent. These were not documents that would trigger immediate criminal referrals if leaked. These were documents designed to be deniable, to carry institutional distance, to provide what intelligence professionals call plausible deniability. According to reporting by The Guardian itself, and confirmed by multiple legal analysts who have reviewed the cache, the documents outline a coordinated information operation spanning 19 months. The operation had three primary objectives. Objective 1, shape international legal opinion regarding actions in Gaza between October 2023 and March 2025. Objective 2, preempt international criminal court proceedings by establishing alternative narratives in European and North American media ecosystems. Objective 3, coordinate diplomatic pressure on states considering recognition of Palestinian statehood or ICC arrest warrant enforcement. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of documentation anywhere else. Now, let us talk about what these papers actually contain. Announcement number 1, the Hasbro Coordination Protocols. And this one matters more than anything else because it establishes intent. The term Hasbra, for those unfamiliar, is Hebrew for explanation or advocacy. It is the formal term used by Israeli government agencies for public diplomacy efforts. What the Whitehall Papers reveal is that between April and September 2024, senior officials in the UK Foreign Office participated in bi-weekly coordination calls explicitly labeled Hasbro Strategy Sessions in the calendar invitations. The participants included Martin Fowler, Director of the Middle East and North Africa Directorate at the Foreign Office, David Klein, Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications at the Israeli Embassy in London, and at least 3 occasions, video link participation from State Department officials in Washington. According to the meeting minutes included in the leaked cache, these sessions covered, quote, messaging alignment on proportionality assessments, preemptive response frameworks for casualty number reporting, and coordination of expert commentary placement in Tier 1 media outlets, end quote. That language is not diplomatic boilerplate. That is operational planning. One memo dated June 14, 2024, authored by Fowler himself, states, and I am quoting him directly here, quote, we must ensure that independent legal analysis emerging from academic and NGO sectors does not gain unchallenged traction in European policy circles. Recommend coordinated op-ed placement in Financial Times, Guardian, and Le Monde with authors from established think tanks, end quote. That is not public diplomacy. That is information operation architecture. The distinction matters legally because information operations targeting domestic populations in the United Kingdom and United States carry different legal frameworks than traditional foreign policy advocacy. The United Kingdom operates under guidelines established after the Iraq War, inquiries that explicitly prohibit government coordination of media narratives on matters of legal controversy without parliamentary notification. The United States has similar restrictions under the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, though enforcement has always been murky. What these documents show is systematic circumvention of those restrictions by outsourcing coordination to embassy staff and think tank intermediaries. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the ICC preemption strategy. This is the part legal scholars have confirmed carries the most significant implications. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants in November 2025 for senior Israeli officials on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity related to actions in Gaza. What the Whitehall papers now reveal is that Western governments knew those warrants were coming as early as March 2024, 11 months before they were issued, and spent that entire period attempting to prevent them through diplomatic pressure and legal obstruction. A briefing memo dated March 22, 2024, circulated to senior officials in London, Washington, and Ottawa outlines what it calls a multi-track approach to ICC mitigation. Track 1, direct diplomatic engagement with ICC prosecutor Karim Khan to delay proceedings pending further evidence review. Track 2, legal challenges to ICC jurisdiction through amicus briefs filed by allied states and NGOs. Track 3, and I am quoting directly, quote, preparation of alternative accountability frameworks that could provide off-ramp for ICC to defer proceedings under complementarity principle, end quote. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the legal exposure becomes impossible to ignore. The complementarity principle is a provision in the Rome Statute, the treaty that created the ICC, which allows the court to defer to national legal systems if those systems are genuinely investigating and prosecuting the same crimes. What Track 3 describes is not genuine accountability. It describes the creation of simulacrum investigations designed specifically to block ICC jurisdiction without producing actual prosecutions. And we know this because the documents themselves say so. A memo from July 2024, authored by a senior legal advisor whose name is redacted in the published version but has been confirmed by multiple sources as Jonathan Harris, deputy legal advisor at the Foreign Office, states, quote, the Israeli government has indicated willingness to establish a commission of inquiry with international observer participation, provided terms of reference are negotiated in advance to exclude certain categories of evidence and ensure findings cannot be used in third-party prosecutions, end quote. That is not an accountability mechanism. That is an obstruction architecture, and 3 Western governments helped design it. The documents further reveal that between May and October 2024, UK and US officials participated in at least 7 coordination meetings with Israeli counterparts specifically focused on, quote, managing ICC exposure through procedural delays and jurisdictional challenges, end quote. One particularly damaging memo from September 3rd describes a strategy session where participants discussed, quote, the importance of maintaining European state reluctance to enforce potential ICC warrants through sustained diplomatic messaging on security cooperation implications, end quote. Translation, if you enforce these arrest warrants, we will reconsider intelligence sharing and defense partnerships. That is not legal argument. That is coercion. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The media placement operation. Embedded within the Whitehall papers are detailed spreadsheets tracking media appearances, op-ed placements, and expert commentary across major English language outlets between June 2024 and February 2026. The spreadsheets are color-coded. Green indicates successfully placed content. Yellow indicates pending pitches. Red indicates rejected or failed placements. What makes this extraordinary is the level of detail. The spreadsheets include the names of specific journalists, the outlets they write for, their previous coverage of Israel-Palestine issues, assessment ratings on their likely receptivity to coordinated messaging, and in some cases, notes on personal relationships with embassy staff or think tank fellows. One entry from August 2024 lists a senior correspondent at a major American newspaper, identifies them as, quote, historically sympathetic but increasingly skeptical post-Gaza escalation, end quote, and notes, quote, recommend cultivation through background access with senior IDF officials during next DC visit, end quote. Another entry tracks an academic who published a legal analysis questioning proportionality assessments in Gaza. The note reads, quote, negative impact significant. Recommend counterplacement with alternative legal scholar. Chatham House contact confirmed availability, end quote. This is not public relations. This is perception management at industrial scale, and the documents show it was coordinated across three governments with the explicit goal of shaping legal and political discourse in ways that would benefit one party to an ongoing conflict under international legal scrutiny. The reason this matters is the same reason the Iraq War intelligence failures mattered. The reason the Afghanistan papers mattered. When governments systematically manipulate the information environment on questions of legal accountability and war crimes, they do not just deceive their publics. They corrupt the very mechanisms designed to prevent atrocity. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let us talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The first story, the one you are seeing on CNN and BBC and Sky News, is about the leak itself. Who leaked the documents? Was it a whistleblower or a hack? Will there be prosecutions? Should journalists have published classified material? That story is important, but it is also a distraction. The second story, the one that matters more in the long run, is about what the documents reveal regarding the collapse of the rules-based international order. And I know that phrase has become a cliché, but these documents give it concrete meaning. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States and United Kingdom, two permanent members of the UN Security Council, two nations that position themselves as architects and guarantors of international humanitarian law after World War II, engage in systematic efforts to obstruct an international court created specifically to hold powerful states accountable for atrocity crimes, that is not diplomatic maneuvering. That is not interest-based politics. That is repudiation. And the response from those governments has been telling. The UK Foreign Office issued a statement calling the leak, quote, a serious breach of confidence that will be investigated fully, end quote. Notice what they did not say. They did not say the documents were fabricated. They did not say the characterizations were inaccurate. They said the leak was a breach of confidence. That is confirmation of authenticity through misdirection. The U.S. State Department was even more revealing. Spokesman Richard Torres stated, quote, we do not comment on alleged leaked documents, but we categorically reject any suggestion that the United States has sought to interfere with the independence of international legal institutions, end quote. That statement was made on April 8th. By April 10th, The Guardian had published 3 follow-up articles with additional documents showing explicit State Department participation in ICC obstruction planning. Torres has not repeated that categorical rejection. The Israeli government response was different in tone, but equally revealing. Prime Minister Netanyahu called the leak, quote, part of a coordinated campaign by Israel's enemies to delegitimize our right to self-defense, end quote. He did not deny coordination with Western allies. He framed it as justified defense against delegitimization. That rhetorical move is important because it concedes the substance while contesting the framing. If you are a taxpayer in the United Kingdom or the United States, what is happening right now is not a foreign policy story. It is an accountability story. Your government spent 18 months and resources you funded to obstruct international legal mechanisms designed to prevent war crimes. And they did so not through formal opposition or legal argument in open court, but through covert coordination, media manipulation, and diplomatic coercion. If you are someone who believes in the possibility of international law constraining state violence, these documents are evidence that the most powerful states have concluded those constraints no longer bind them when their interests are at stake. And once that precedent is established, it applies to everyone. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same: the Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers of ancient Greece, went to war. 27 years. Both sides exhausted themselves militarily, economically, and morally. And who won? Macedon, a peripheral kingdom that had been irrelevant before the war, rose to dominate all of Greece because the two powers that should have maintained order destroyed each other. The parallel is not exact, but the pattern is recognizable. When dominant powers in an international system abandon the rules they themselves created, when they exhaust their legitimacy through visible hypocrisy, when they weaponize institutions meant to constrain violence, they do not just damage their own credibility. They create vacuums that other powers are eager to fill. Right now, China is watching these revelations very carefully. So is Russia. So is every state that has chafed under Western-led international institutions for decades. The argument they have been making, the argument Western governments have dismissed as authoritarian propaganda, is that international law is simply Western power dressed up in legal language. That human rights discourse is a weapon wielded selectively against enemies and ignored when inconvenient for allies. These documents make that argument far more persuasive than any propaganda campaign ever could. When the United States and United Kingdom are caught on paper coordinating to obstruct the International Criminal Court, every argument about rules-based order, about accountability, about the universality of human rights law becomes that much harder to make credibly. And that vacuum, that credibility collapse, is what rising powers are built on. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, genuine accountability. Parliaments in London and Washington launch formal inquiries. Officials involved in the coordination are held to account through legal or political mechanisms. Reforms are implemented to prevent future information operations targeting domestic populations. The International Criminal Court proceeds with its work without further interference. This path requires political will that I see no evidence of currently. The UK Parliament is distracted by economic crises. The US Congress is paralyzed by election year politics. The appetite for confronting intelligence and foreign policy establishments over actions taken in support of a key ally is virtually non-existent. Likelihood, less than 15%. Path 2, performative reform and eventual normalization. There are hearings. There are statements of concern. Perhaps one or two mid-level officials are reassigned. A commission is established to review coordination protocols. Recommendations are issued. Nothing fundamental changes. The media cycle moves on. In 18 months, similar coordination happens again with slightly better operational security. This is the historical pattern. This is what happened after Iraq WMD failures. This is what happened after NSA surveillance revelations. This is what happened after the Afghanistan papers. Likelihood, 65%. Path 3, accelerated institutional decay. The revelations reinforce existing cynicism about Western leadership among both domestic populations and international actors. Trust in international legal institutions continues eroding. States increasingly operate based purely on power calculations rather than legal or normative constraints. The Westphalian system, already under strain, accelerates toward a more explicitly multipolar world where might makes right and international law becomes fully irrelevant. This path does not require anyone to choose it. It is simply what happens when accountability mechanisms fail repeatedly. Likelihood 20%, but rising. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest, with elements of Path 3 emerging gradually. The institutions are resilient enough to absorb this scandal without immediate collapse, but resilience is not the same as legitimacy. Every absorbed scandal, every revelation without consequence, every coordination exposed without accountability weakens the foundation a little more, and foundations do not announce when they are about to fail. They just fail. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if international legal institutions can be systematically obstructed by the very powers that created them, what purpose do those institutions serve? Second, what mechanisms exist to hold Permanent Security Council members accountable when they act in concert to avoid accountability? Third, what happens to international order when the gap between stated principles and actual practice becomes so wide that even allies can no longer pretend not to notice? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you believe Path 1 is still possible, or if we are locked into the pattern of performative accountability. Tell me what levers of pressure, if any, could actually force genuine reform. We will keep tracking every development in this story as more documents emerge and as governments are forced to respond. That is what this channel does every single day. We do not move on to the next news cycle. We follow the threads until they lead somewhere real. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand not just what leaked, but what it means for the system those leaks exposed. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, because The Guardian has indicated this is the first release, not the only release. More documents are coming, and we will be here to walk through every single one.